Welcome, folks. This next session is on ACES development. We're going to be talking about ACES here. And just for those who are unaware, ACES is the Academy Color Encoding System. And it's used in movie making. So a good deal of folks are using this for their color management at the end of their pipeline for getting stuff in from the cameras and then back out to different kinds of displays and deliverables. And so the reason that we're here today is that we wanted to give you an update of where we are with ACES, and also to let you know how our process works in an open source kind of sense, because we are similar in a lot of respects to other projects that are in the Academy Software Foundation, but as it turns out, ACES is not yet in the ASWF. It's something that we look forward to, but when we originally started each of these processes, ASWF and also some new stuff with ACES, it was kind of a parallel path. And so we've taken a lot of hints from the way that ASWF is laid out, and more of that discussion will happen as we go. But we wanted to make sure that we had something rolling, and we'll eventually hope that we will be one of the projects that is under the foundation. The plan for today is that we're going to go over a lot of that development process with Scott Dyer from the Academy, and then Chris Clark from Netflix is going to be speaking from the point of view of a virtual working group. That's what VWG stands for, as a chair. And then the perspective from Chris Brejon, who's a member of the virtual working groups. He's going to talk a little bit about how that worked and what it's like to be involved in ACES as a participant. And then, of course, we'll have Q&A at the end. But the important thing is that we want to make sure that you have an opportunity to get involved. And so ACES is a big project. There are a lot of sub parts that are being worked on simultaneously. And there's a lot of opportunity for contribution from a lot of different kinds of people. So yes, we need programmers, but we also need people who are practitioners. And so we're looking for a lot of different kinds of folks. And so let's make sure that you have a chance to get involved, and we'll talk about that more as we go. Let's go ahead and get started. I'm going to hand it over to Scott, and we'll kick it off with the ACES development process.
All right, thanks, Rod. Hello, everyone. My name is Scott Dyer, and I am a senior imaging engineer with the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences Science and Technology Council. And I work a lot on ACES and have been around for about 10 years. So I can tell you about our old process a little bit, which led up to ACES 1.0, which was released toward the end of 2014. So the old process, the perception with that, it was a little bit mystical to those on the outside, those not in Hollywood directly. We weren't taking advantage of the very many tools that we have now. And so it seemed very much like an academy project and not a community project. And processes and decisions were kind of detached from the users that actually put this into their movies and implement it. And so we wanted to make sure that as ACES continues to develop, we switched our process to be more open and community driven. Because who's better to tell us the needs than the actual users of the system, to tell us what works, what doesn't, what would make it work better. And to go along with that, of course, you need some oversight, because what's good for one very vocal user somewhere in the world might not be good for all users. And so we need someone or a group of people to oversee and make sure that the overall direction of the system maintains aligned with the goals of ACES. And so we have a structure that will look a little bit familiar to those who know how the ASWF is set up. So next slide, please. So here is just a little overview of the simple organization chart of how the new process is set up post 1.0 and as we move toward an ACES 2. Up at the top, we have an ACES leadership team, and that's composed of Rod and his other vice chair, their vice chairs, and Annie Chang is our ACES chair at the moment. So, and then also on that is some Academy staff. And below it, we have two technical advisory councils, one of them architecture, one of them implementation, and those have different focuses. And beneath those, and I'm going to expand on those on the next slides, but Beneath those, we have the working groups. And the working groups are really the core of the community-driven effort. That's where all the work actually gets done. And those are temporary committees of participants and users that exist until their specific work items are completed, and they deliver their group's output and deliverables up to the parent TAC. And the TAC reviews it, makes sure that it fits in the way that they're responsible to make sure it fits into the system. And at that point, we integrate it into the ACES project. So next slide. Talk a little bit more about the working groups, which really are the core. And then we'll hear from actual people who have been in the working groups. So these are where you do the actual engineering, development, documentation, and other tasks that are essential for creating new features and integrating them into the ACES reference code and things like that. These are done with regular meetings that are held via web conference. So that's where the VWG abbreviation comes up. You might see a few times throughout this presentation. Those are virtual working groups. We no longer have physical meetings. We used to have these be physical in Hollywood, and it was kind of localized because it was very hard for people around the world to join those, obviously, if they're not in town when we have those meetings. So we have regular meetings via web conference. Those are all recorded and posted online for review for those who missed it or want to go back and revisit some of the conversations that we had. And each project is given a homepage where we collect relevant documents, to-do items, and sort of track the progress of each one of these individual working groups. And furthermore, we have a discussion area on our ACES Central Community Forum where conversations can happen between meetings, and where we have an archive or a record that we can go back and search or see kind of the development of an idea and the contributions there before we work it into a final product. So participation in these groups is open to anyone willing and able to contribute. They're all done online, and links to the meetings and information are all available on acescentral.com. And you can also create a group. So if you're a user who has a need or something that you think is important to the system that needs to be addressed, you can form a proposal form, fill out a proposal form available on our site and submit it to start your own working group. Really, to do that, we asked hopefully that there's some sort of socialization of an idea, and it's not just some like little pet project that you want to do. But if you're passionate about it and there's a reason for us to do it, the TAC, parent TAC for that particular project will consider it and make sure that it's aligned with the goals of ACES, and then we can get a working group going. These are intended to be short-lived and issue-based. We don't want these working groups dragging on forever. So the more focused and clear the deliverables, the better. We want these to be formed, solve a problem, and then conclude, so we can move on and address other working groups and kind of keep these things moving forward. And finally, when the working group has completed their work, as mentioned before, they submit a status report and throughout the progress of their work. And then at the very end, they present their deliverables to the parent technical advisory council. So next slide. I'll talk about the TACs themselves a little bit. So these are comprised of industry experts that have a broad understanding of motion picture workflows and the impact that those workflows will have on their organization's objectives. And these people are pulled from studios and production companies, large stakeholders in ACES, and people who the decisions made about ACES really will impact how their work gets done. And they're supporters of ACES, and they want to make sure that it succeeds. These are also practitioners, people who are using ACES in post-production, VFX, editorial, archiving. Game studios have become very important users of ACES, and just general color scientists and subject matter experts as well. So these all make up the TACs. We have a good mixture of differing backgrounds and people, and they're not really responsible for any engineering work. They're really there as oversight to provide guidance and to make sure, again, that the working groups are aligning with the design goals of ACES. So architecture TAC primarily is about the architecture. So that includes core transforms, encodings, file formats, metadata, things like that, that are sort of about the system design. And they they oversee that kind of stuff. And then obviously once an idea or an algorithm or a transform has been created, that actually has to become available to users. And so the implementation tack is really focused on how the architectural elements of ACES then get put into end user tools, are documented and delivered to users. And so the architecture tack really, or the implementation tack is important to make sure that these can actually, these ideas that the architecture comes up with can be implemented, and there's no issues there. Next slide. So the leadership at the top level, as previously mentioned, is Annie Chang, Rod Bogart, and Joachim Zell are our chair and vice chairs currently. And then also on there is SciTech staff and consultants. And really these people are at the top level, they're there just to kind of define the overall project strategy and to keep things focused. ACES leadership is responsible for allocating resources, defining work items, and prioritizing the limited resources that we do have for all these various working groups that are ongoing at any given time. And also communicating this stuff through marketing efforts and with acescentral.com. Next slide. All right, so as I said, there's a lot of things that were very similar to the ASWF structure, the organizational hierarchy, the use of technical advisory council to oversee the projects. And we really want to have it be open and community driven. So that's definitely key connections there to ASWF. But there's a few things that keep us from being exactly like that because ACES is a system and it's very complex and has many components. And so it's much more difficult to kind of put that into just a single project that could probably be easily ported into ASWF at some point, because there's software, all these tools integrate ACES into their products, much like those who are on the OCIO call. You know that OCIO gets put into a lot of different software applications and things, but ACES is also a big part of OCIO. So there's a lot of this cross overlap, and how to do that exactly is still being determined, and there's still a lot of development going on in ACES itself. And there's no dedicated engineers from the companies. Everyone that contributes to ACES is doing so volunteer or with approval, I guess, from their companies to dedicate some time to contributing to ACES efforts. And so we also have this product partner program, which is a way that we've come up with a mechanism to help provide a little bit of guidance to software manufacturers and vendors who want to say they support ACES, and for whatever their tool might be, their product category, whether it be a color corrector or a camera or display, there are different criteria for them to meet, which we believe helps show that they ensure a high quality ACES implementation. So it's ACES is very complex, and we're not exactly sure how to reconcile that. But we have a couple people with us today, like Chris Clark, who I'll introduce right now. He's going to tell you a little bit about his experience running one of these working groups in the past, and also as a participant. So I'll turn it over to Chris now.
Hello, everyone. I'm Chris Clark. I am a manager of imaging technology at Netflix, and I was one of the guinea pigs for this new process for ACESNext. And like others on this call, I've been involved with ACES for, I think, about 10 years now, where, in the early days, I would call it, the development activity was mainly in person. You could dial in. I think I remember Kodak dialing in from Rochester, New York in the early days. So it's definitely a different time. But back then I worked at a studio, Sony Pictures, that cared deeply about its archive, and being owned by a technology company was thinking about things like HDR. And so ACES was a priority there. And so we used it on some early feature films where it kind of required a little bit of tribal knowledge and custom things. And I think it wasn't really until 1.0 when it was much more widely supported and things were built into a lot of different products. And around that time, I moved over to Netflix, and And here we're trying to build this global studio. We have offices all over the world and productions all over the world. And so we really look to open standards because a lot of what our group does is identify technology that everyone can use no matter where you are in the world, and whether it's a blockbuster film or a little docuseries or a Korean zombie show. You know, we want color management to kind of be a fabric that everyone can use. So now we're in this phase of working towards 2.0, as Scott mentioned, and it's been exciting to be more involved, and I had the opportunity to chair one of the first groups. Next slide. So the first group that I was chairing was the ACES metadata file group, which was formerly called ACES Clip. And like I said, I was kind of the guinea pig. So, you know, and, you know, Annie and Rod and everyone was honest about that, the fact that this is a new process, and there's lots of room for improvement. And part of what chairing the group is going to be is providing feedback on how things are going. But basically the groups are, I would say, academy organized, but community driven. So the academy will handle things like setting up the go-to meetings for all the calls and recordings. They have ACES Central areas within there that are dedicated to each group's work, as well as a Dropbox paper kind of workspace where you can post files and documents and things like that. But I would say these middle two things, getting people involved and maintaining scope, those two are the main core responsibilities, I would say, of a group chair. Getting people involved, you know, some of that is organic with people that are interested in the work that's going on, or they may have a product that they're planning on implementing it in, or just really eager participants. But some of it really is targeted outreach because not everyone knows that these groups are publicly open and anyone can be involved. And so some of it is letting people know that this is going on and here's when the meetings are. And now the Academy has a really convenient calendar where you can see when all the meetings are happening. So that's part of it. The second part is maintaining scope. So when you start a group, you're proposing an idea and a goal. And what happens when you get all these really smart people on a call is that people start to, you know, expand the scope and try to solve all the production problems. And so part of the chair's responsibility is maintaining that and really focusing on the core goals of the original proposal. And the last part is this bridge between the architecture groups and the implementation group. The AMF group that I was chairing was an architecture group because it was designing the specification that is AMF. But I really had to be there for the second group that started because there's obviously going to be questions about design choices and what the architecture group was thinking when they made the spec. And so I think for any group that's starting up, it's important for ideally for someone on the implementation side to be listening in and keeping an eye on the architecture, and then for people from the architecture side to be part of the implementation discussions. And as far as future improvements, I think we're already seeing a lot of improvement in some of the new groups, particularly the gamut mapping group, which has done a really amazing job at summarizing meetings for people who miss them. They are recorded, but they've been doing these little summaries of the key points, things that had consensus during those meetings, things like that. And also providing progress reports for you know, months long of work and kind of summarizing milestones or things that they've achieved. Another one is time zone accommodation because, like I mentioned, this is an international global project. And so we have tons of amazing people joining from all over the world. And in order to accommodate that gamut mapping group has been doing alternating times. So some mornings, some evenings. And so because they're recorded, people can join ones that work for their time zones and watch the others on their own time. And the last thing is chat. So we've been talking a lot about it, and I think Scott and Alex have already been looking at options for chat, but really just improving the ways that we can communicate when we're not on the meetings, and keeping track of all the work that's happening, and just having kind of more flow of consciousness chats going. So I think that's in the works now. I think Scott and Alex might be able to answer questions about that later, but that's, I think, about it. And so now I'm going to introduce the other Chris, Chris Brejon, who's going to give his perspective on being a participant in these groups.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. I'm Chris Brejon, lead lighting at Elimination McGuff. I was responsible for the ACES implementation at our studio and wanted to share with you a quick recap about it. I'm going to focus today especially on full CG animation studios and the benefits you can have from using ACES. First, it allows you to work with an industry standard, which is very helpful for exchanging files and deliveries. Secondly, ACES set things straight when it comes to terminology. In color management, the use of accurate terms is highly recommended. And at last but not least, ACES actually makes your renders look better. If we have a look at the two examples below, on the left we have a linear render displayed with a sRGB transfer function. On the right we have an ACES CG render displayed with the sRGB ACES output transform. We can see how the area light and its influence is much more interesting in ACES. Just look at the shape of the red sphere and the fall off on the green plane. Pretty cool, right? Next slide, please. Let's roll back a bit. My first experience with ACES was on Lego Batman at Animal Logic in Sydney. I was blown away by the quality of the image and the extreme saturation. I didn't know much about color management back then, but I felt something was just right. Started to watch videos and ask questions about ACES. If you're new to this field, I would recommend to watch the excellent SIGGRAPH 2015 video by Alex Fry, who was compositing supervisor on the Lego movies. Next slide, please. Back to Paris in 2018, I had one idea in mind, implementing ACES at our studio. I had to face some challenges, so I didn't fully grasp what was ACES. I just knew it looked great from my Lego Batman experience. Our supervisors were used to a linear workflow. Why would they change? There was lots of misconceptions about linear, and there was no OCO implementation in our proprietary softwares. I didn't know it back then, but I was about to start the most fascinating 2-year journey with one of our lead developers, Christophe. Next slide, please. We had to face many obstacles, but I have learned so much in the way. Here's a couple of hints from our experience. First of all, don't try to convince anyone if you don't fully understand the topic. Secondly, we realized that one of the biggest misconceptions in the industry was about linear, that it was some sort of color space that would give you access to infinite colors. Not at all. Thanks to the ACES community, we defeated old mysticism. Linear is a transfer function, not a color space. This may sound trivial or basic, but it was a giant step for us. Thanks to the ACES terminology, everything is much more explicit and clearer. Linear is now utility linear sRGB. Next slide, please. One of my tasks was to convince my supervisors. I really had to dig deep into ACES to find the proper way. I started with the most obvious reasons. ACES is a standard developed by the EMPAS. Yep, the people from the Oscars didn't convince. ACES has been used in more than 300 movies and is a standard for Netflix. Didn't convince neither. ACES is currently used by many VFX studios such as ELM, Animal Logic or Framestore. Didn't convince. Finally, it is this one sentence that tipped the balance in favor. Rendering in ACES CG brings us closer to spectral rendering. Let's have a look at the kernel box in the next slide. On the left, we have a linear kernel box, and on the right, we have an ACES CG render. If you look at the green sphere on the right, you can clearly see some red bouncing from the wall on it, thanks to the wide gamut rendering. Same thing on the red sphere. Next slide, please. I have done probably hundreds of tests comparing different display transform. One of the most interesting was the following one. We compared the Macbeth chart displayed with the SPI-anim LUT versus the Rec 709 ACES output transform and increased the stops to compare. At 6 stops, you can clearly see what is happening. The color 18, which is cyan, does not go to white with the SPI-anim. I found it fascinating to observe that this particular color 18 is outside the sRGB gamut, knowing that the chart is used in many LookDev assets worldwide. ACES 2.0 should even bring more improvement on different aspects, such as gamut mapping and output transforms. Next slide, please. I've been an ACES mentor quite recently, and I've been following the gamut mapping virtual working group with great interest. I've actually been learning a lot because this group is quite technical, but I think I've been able to follow, asking questions around, reading some articles, and interacting on ACES Central. We generally connect through GoToMeeting at specific hours. It's really great and easy to use. Anyone can join and participate, and you get to listen and learn on specific topics from these great minds. Next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. Every week, the group shares set new goals and milestones, trying to see what our options are, comparing different solutions. It is a slow process that takes time, but it's pretty much enjoyable since you can actually experience the progress that has been made week after week. It feels great to be part of this community. I know it can be intimidating at first to post on ACES Central, but I have felt welcome since day one. You actually feel like you're part of something that is bigger than you and that hopefully will improve the work and quality of thousands of artists out there. Next slide, please. I would like to thank the ACES community, Christophe and Xavier Beck for their patience and support. More information can be found on ACES Central and on my website, chrisbrejon.com. Thanks for watching.
Great, thanks, Chris. So we want to bring it back to where we're headed here with ACES. And where we're headed is ACES 2.0. And so we want to talk a little bit about what that means and what's active and what you can get involved in. So there are some implementation groups that are currently working. And this is the way this happened originally, was that we had architecture groups first and then implementation groups after. And so now these are the ones that have spun up and are getting work done. And so that's the ACES metadata file, of course, and then the common LUT format, which was also mentioned earlier in the OCIO talk. And I definitely want to thank Doug, Patrick, Carol, and Michael for all the nice ACES mentions during their OCIO talk earlier. We also have an input transforms group that's working on what it means in order to take content from the camera in however it captures to get things into ACES. And so we're trying to make sure that we have good best practices around that. In the architecture group, the gamut mapping group was mentioned earlier. These guys are making great stride in figuring out how conversions from one space to another can possibly occur with minimal amount of clipping or artifacts. And the reason this is important is for the upcoming group, which is for output transforms, because one of our goals when we first started this new ACESNext, ACES 2.0 process is that we wanted to be able to, well, we went around and we asked a bunch of people a bunch of questions about this. We did what we called the listening tour. And one of the main things that we heard back is it would be great if the RRT was invertible, and it would be great if there were some parameters associated with the way that output transforms worked. And so that's where we're headed. And a lot of these other things have been staged towards that. So we're on our way there. And that's the big next group here. So let's go to the next slide. We want to make sure that you can come and be involved. ACESCentral.com, that's the website there at the top, is got a new look and a new layout, and there's a lot that you can see about. One example here is that we have the ACES logo program, which is a way of highlighting which products really do meet the needs and the requirements of each of the facilities that they're doing. And so we're adding additional partners there. But if you join ACES Central, you can get involved immediately. You can certainly do the discussion forum questions like Chris just mentioned, where you ask a question if there's something you want to know. People answer quite quickly, and you can get yourself up to date pretty fast. But you can also immediately join any of the meetings that have been mentioned. All the working group meetings are open, as well as the TAC meetings. So if you want to attend an TAC meeting, you can certainly listen in. It's still TAC business, and so we would try to keep the distracting discussions to a minimum, but at the same time, all of that is open to you too. And so it's one of our goals here with the ACES 2.0 is that it all be transparent and open and give a lot of access to folks who can, who normally felt like they were a little bit distant in this process. So next slide. Regarding the logo program, as mentioned earlier, there are now 31 members, so that's hardware and software implementations, and so that includes a lot of big names for companies, but in particular, it is their products. It's not just a company that gets this. So we do assign the product per product for the logo program. And then we've also added the service provider tier, and that was something that we were missing before because we generally had this around, well, it's a camera or it's a piece of software that does color conversion, but also DI, VFX, and dailies all need to be able to have criteria for the quality that they're doing. So we want people to get involved with the working groups. We are looking for, as we say, new energy. And it's mainly folks who are passionate about this. If you really, it matters to you that your content looks right and that you have some unique situation that you're delivering to, we still want to make sure that we get to the situation that you need and that we've got you covered. And so we're really trying to listen to as many diverse use cases as we possibly can. But we do need programmers for reference implementations, but we also need people who can evaluate the quality of what they're seeing. So use the discussion forum, get help and give help, and please participate in the working group discussions. So it's time for some discussion and Q&A. If anybody has questions, we right now don't have any in the Q&A chat, but we certainly can make up a few if if none of our audience is going to ask anything in particular. But I'll hover for a moment and allow that to happen so that somebody can type and hit return. But in the absence of that, I'm going to go back to Scott for a moment. Can you talk a little bit about the feedback that we got from what we called the RAE group, because we didn't mention that as being a
yeah, sure. It's hard for me to come up with all the specifics, but a few, I guess maybe 2 or 3 years ago now, probably 2, we had a group of very, well, many of them are involved in many of these projects, good users, feedback. They kind of got together, discussed a bunch of things about ACES that they saw as areas that could use some improvement. And related to that was not just architecture of the system or algorithms, but really included the process stuff as well. And part of that was, you know, the ability, archiving discussions and having a record of where decisions came from, things like that. And it was really great feedback and very important for us to hear at the time, because I mean, it was something we always wanted to do, but we really just didn't know how to do it. And we've been figuring that out. We responded to that paper. It's on the original paper, if anyone wants to review the bullet points and stuff, there's a thread for it on acescentral.com. You can just go to the search and type in RAE, or RAE stands for Retrospective ACES Enhancement, or ACES Retrospective and Enhancements paper or something, I believe. It's been a little while, but there was great feedback in there, very well articulated concerns and requests for more openness and things like that. And so that really did trigger a lot of these reconfigurations that we've undergone, and we're still learning. You know, as Chris said, his group was one of the first ones to go active under this new structure. And you know, we every time we do this, we're learning a few things to tweak, how to run it better the next time. Oh, there's a link in the chat now. Great, thanks. So yeah, it's very good feedback in there, and that really did inspire us for many of the things that we've been trying to implement. And if you look at their list of what they were asking for, I believe we've pretty much addressed most, if not all of them at this point, except for obviously having an ACES 2.0, but that's underway, and that being like a revision to the actual output transform architecture, the look, if you will, of ACES, the basic rendering transform. And that is something that is a huge task and will be a huge shift, but we are working on getting to that in the next year. So that would be the massive task. Yep.
We have a few questions in the chat box there, Rod.
Yeah, I see that. It seems like there's a couple things about timelines. So maybe we should kick off a couple of those discussions. So, so one of the things that we didn't mention about the virtual working groups is that each of them has an Academy staff member that is associated that keeps track. And so Alex and Scott tend to be those individuals. And so they're on different ones. For gamut mapping, if you could give the kind of rough timeline information, that would be helpful, since that's one of the questions.
Yeah, so all of the timelines really are driven by the individual deliverables that those groups are working on. In particular, the gamut mapping group is sort of closer to finished than it is the start. They're in the process right now of optimizing parameters associated with a candidate algorithm and doing some real-world testing. Carol Payne, who's driving that group with Matthias Strassenberg, are in the process of putting together a proposal for how they go about doing testing. And then once that testing is complete, they'll reassess and determine whether or not they need to make more changes to the algorithm itself, and then ultimately produce a deliverable, an algorithm deliverable, and present that to the TAC. Sort of long story short, I guess, is that the timeline depends on the deliverables, and they are closer to finished than they are the start.
Right, but it is not. This is not many months away, right? It is still. This is looking to wrap up this fall, I believe.
Yeah, I think this fall seems like a reasonable timeline.
Yeah. Likewise, there's a question about the timeline for IDT, and well, I'll actually read this question because it's more than one thing. What is the timeline plan for adding formal support for a film IDT into ACES? And will this be part of the IDT virtual working group? And what timelines can we expect for any movement? So I think what this is getting at is that the IDT is how do you get from the space of whatever you captured to become into ACES? And what if the thing you captured is film? So what would be the timeline for that? And I think it falls under the same heading as what we want to do with the IDT group, which is just getting started, is determine how the testing should be confirmed to guarantee that, for example, does every camera have to reproduce exactly the scene the same way, which is sort of unrealistic. And so how do we, what are the compromises and what are the mitigations that we do for the different vendors? And
Ron,
so,
I would note that that film is supported in ACES 1.0. There are two transforms in the color space conversion transforms directory, one called ADX10 to ACES, the other called ADX16 to ACES. Those can be effectively thought of as film IDTs. We would like to make improvements to those, but it is supported in ACES 1.0.
right. But it does need another pass, particularly in the presence of the other cameras. And now that they're going to be more unified, we'll want to make sure that the film one is more unified too. So let's make sure that I covered all that. And so timelines again for IDT, that one's just getting started. So we're hoping that that'll kick off soon. And in fact, there have already been a couple of initial meetings, and that should hopefully only take a couple of months. But with all these things, there is a lot of hardware testing that needs to happen. And in the absence of people being able to get into the same room at the same time, that has become a little bit more challenging. So there have been some delays due to that are unfortunate, but that is something that I think still we feel like we want to be by the end of the year. Alex, could you talk a little bit about the general ACES 2.0 timeline in general for our target release?
Yeah, so we're still trying to figure out exactly what the features are for ACES 2.0 or a series of ACES 2.0 releases, and how we plan on going about releasing that. So it is a little bit up in the air. We previously said that we were targeting late 2021 for that kind of release, but everything's a little bit up in the air right now with sort of the change in the world and the change in the ways that we're working. So take that with a grain of salt. Here's actually a good question from Satish Goda. It says, do ACES and OCIO collaborate, and if so, how? Do you want to touch on that, Ron?
Yeah, I think that is an important one. One of the I think there's a lot of overlap between the members of our groups and the members of their groups. And so to some degree, there's collaboration just because a lot of the people are the same. But at the same time, we do specifically talk with the ACES, the OCIO leadership and the ACES leadership, partly for timing, when is their release, when is our release, what other concerns are they're doing. We feel like, to be honest, the OCIO is an implementation of what we've delivered. And so they want to be aware of what we've got coming. And then they're one of our best kind of implementation groups. You can imagine the OCIO is like a product that contains ACES, and it makes it available to others, and it implements the standard and makes it available. And so they've been one of the best, quickest implementation partners for us. And so, yes, it is a good collaboration. I'm really pleased with the work that they've been doing there. And so they've really made ACES available to a lot of folks. And I think that's really been helpful for us. Let's
We've
move
got
on.
another.
Go ahead.
I was just going to try to answer a question from Carol Payne about how to join in on a
Yeah,
virtual
I was
working
just about
group.
to hand that one over. Yes, please go
or
ahead.
to get up to date on their progress. That's a great question. We hinted at it earlier in the presentation, but essentially, if you go to acescentral.com, you can find links to all this stuff. So I'm going to hopefully be able to do this real fast. I don't know.
Okay, it worked.
Can you see my Safari screen? Yes. All right, great. So in here, this is acescentral.com. This is the homepage that you'll get when you load that up. If you go up to the top of the menu bar, there's a thing that says working groups. And if you go there, there's a working groups homepage, and that way it kind of gives you an overview of all the active working groups and has links directly to each one of their homepages. Tells you who's chairing it, when it was started, and its purpose in just it's basically its logline equivalent. You can also go directly to them on the menu by going to the active groups. And if you want to go to, say, the gamut mapping group, you can click on that. And it takes you to this Dropbox paper site, which is what we've been using because it's kind of a live site and kind of lets us do some cool things. And really, so this has an overview of sort of lots of stuff that the group has been doing. There's information on here about the work in progress that's going on, and there's this little table of contents on the side. So if you wanted to jump down to the past meetings, because you can see here, for example, there's been 24 meetings in this group. They've been meeting weekly, so that's why there's been so many. And if you jump to one of those, they're doing a great job of putting summaries on ACES. So everything here is linked, and this is a way you can get up to speed on what's been going on. There is a lot of information, especially for this group, because Carol and Matthias have been doing a great job documenting their progress. So you can really see kind of just a bulleted list of what happened in each meeting and all that stuff. So this is a way you can go and catch up on any groups that interest you. And really, ACEScentral.com is the jumping off point for any of this stuff. So go there and check it out, poke around. And if you have questions, feel free to ask us later. And we'll be happy to.
Scott, you want to show the calendar? I think the calendar's.
Oh yeah, do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't realize we'd have time to show the website so much, but I think this is a great.
While Scott's bringing that up, I'll also just throw in too that there are recordings of every meeting and a transcript, so you can watch the recording and jump around the recording based on the transcript. So that's kind of a neat feature.
Yeah. So let's see. I'll just go to a different group here. So like calendar, we have, oh my goodness.
I think on the ACES Central resources.
Oh, sure. Yeah. The one on the actual ACES. That's a good idea. Yeah. So if you go on the ACES Central homepage again, thank you, Chris. I don't even know how to navigate. No, I do. Here it is. Calendar. Click calendar. Boom. There's this thing, and you can see an overview of when these are. Each working group has its own little color, and you can go and see like, oh, the Gantt mapping group is actually meeting tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific. And you can actually click on that and it'll give you a link right to all the relevant information. So you can see upcoming events and meetings, including the session we're in right now. So yeah, it's always up to date with all the various goings-ons with ACES. All right,
cool.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks a lot, Scott. That's super handy. We had a question from Claire Fox. Can you speak about the role that moving image archivists play within the group? I'm curious how the relationship between stakeholders in production and in archiving has been developing in practice. And I'm still going to hand this off to Scott and Alex for most of the answer, but I do want to say that archiving of ACES has been a big aspect of where we've gotten to today. That the standard for the ACES container and that went through SMPTE, a lot of these things were with a mind towards what it means to do archiving. And so we also, of course, in our partners, folks like Chris Clark, who are at Netflix, also care a good deal about archiving. So we have worked within the studio system, I think, largely for how archiving works, but I've let other folks jump in here. Actually, Chris, did you want to kick in anything? Is there anything, information that you would add on the archiving front?
No, I think that was a good summary. I think every studio has a slightly different approach to archiving, but I know the Academy has always been, you know, an advocate for having a strong archive with things like the Digital Dilemma and a lot of work done there. So I would actually bounce it back to Alex or Scott to see if there's any work in terms of Academy preservation and how that relates to ACES.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would just say that archival is obviously a very important aspect of ACES, and we're always looking for participation from people who specialize in archival. That's getting that viewpoint into the discussion is, I think, critical to making sure that we develop an architecture which doesn't unintentionally cause pain down the line for the archive.
Yeah, thanks. One of the things that wasn't mentioned is that ACES is under the governance of the Academy itself, and there's something called the Science Council, and the Science Council does have archive members on it. And so there's a lot of awareness and discussion that happens at that level as well. So I think the answer is yes, it's active, but any more involvement that you can and would like to provide, we would be encouraging you to do so. Quick question here in the middle is the raw to ACES project still being actively developed? And I'll admit, I don't know the answer to that. So I'd like to know too.
So I'll jump on that. Raw to ACES, we lost our Academy developer a few years ago who was working on that and fostering that along. So it's been a little bit of a dormant state since then. But that being said, we're looking at ways to not only reactivate that project, but also move that project to a home that might be a little more appropriate for it, such as the Academy Software Foundation. I don't want to pre-announce anything yet, but I would maybe keep an eye on Raw to ACES. It's a project that a lot of people got pretty excited about, which was really just a skunk works project when we started it at the Academy.
Okay, so last question that's currently in the Q&A is an interesting one, is do ACES workflows have a bigger impact on the CG world than in 2D? And presumably 2D may just mean camera capture, but which is how I'm going to interpret this question. And continues to say, I ask this because online resources mostly speak about setting up a CG pipeline, which is great, but I'm curious to know more about transitioning to ACES at a 2D shop that does not work with CG. And it's a good question because the original motivation for ACES was a good deal about image exchange between facilities. And at the time, many of those facilities were visual effects facilities. And so a lot of CG was involved. But it had to do with, there was a lot of live action, and then how do you hand something to someone else and make sure that they're seeing things the same way? And so, yes, that's the genesis of this whole thing. But when all said and done, ACES is used on projects that are simply just, how do I've got 3 different cameras on a show, and I want one kind of deliverable that makes sense. And so there's been television shows with no visual effects at all, which had been entirely using ACES for their pipeline. So it's shown up as the more common need was, how do we make things that are different look the same? And as well as, how do we all make it look good in the end when there's a deliverable? I'll allow anybody else to answer, but Chris, you might have some good perspective from a studio.
Yeah, I was going to, the way I interpreted that question was mainly in the context of animation, 2D animation versus 3D animation. And I think if that's the way it was asked, I think what we found at Netflix, because we do have a lot more animation projects now, is that the tools used to create CG animation support ACES more often than the 2D tools. And so that's a bit of a blocker for certain 2D projects to jump over to a fully ACES pipeline. I'm sure a lot of people listening have tried, doing ACES in Photoshop, and it's difficult at best. So, there's areas for improvement definitely in terms of the tools and, Adobe software, things like that for 2D to utilize ACES. Yeah.
No, okay, good point. And actually, the original poster there, if you can clarify whether or not we got to your question via one of the 2 answers that were given, that'd be helpful. But at this point, it looks like we don't have any additional questions that are on the table, and we are coming towards the end of our time. So maybe this would be just a good time to wrap it up here. I certainly want to thank all the speakers and all the folks, and very much all the folks who have been involved in ACES along the way. There's been a lot of contribution from a lot of different people, and it's been really great to see. When we kicked off this ACESNext effort, we weren't sure how it was going to go because we were doing a lot of experimental things, and as Chris Clark, some people were guinea pigs as we were learning how to do it. but I do really feel like we've made a lot of progress and has been very successful, and it's really great to see the uptake and the adoption of ACES in general into products as well into projects. So that's been really terrific. So thanks everybody. And I think we'll let our folks wrap us up however it is that this thing ends. It probably just all goes dark. That's fade to black.
Thanks everyone.
Thanks.